This is going to be fun. I'm dropping science today. I'm going to teach you guys how to connect a set of airbags, like the ones on j.low. These are in the back of the truck. They're load bags. They've got electronic solenoids, an air compressor, a tank. I'm going to school you guys on how to connect all of that to the Edge CTS2s in the dash of my truck. We're going to use that dash, that touch screen, all of that technology, all of that power to make the back of this truck go up and down, to enable it to tow more than it ever could without the airbags, and to eliminate the analog gauges, the momentary buttons in the dash, all that old school tech. That's going away right now in this episode. This should be a familiar view. I mean, not outside the door of my garage through the backup camera, but that's the CTS2, still on the suction cup mount from the last time I worked on this truck. And I may change that this time. I'm going to get out the gauge pod and the adapter and see if I like that better than the suction cup mount. This has popped off once this summer in the Georgia heat from sitting in the sun, but for the most part that's been a stable mount. Here's the main source of our modifications. That's an Analogue Air Gauge for the rear airbags in this truck, and two momentary buttons. These are 12-volt buttons. You can hear them click. Those activate the solenoids controlling the flow of air from our reserve air tank to our airbags. One of the nice things about this body style truck is it's super easy to work on. The dash bezel just held on with clips. You don't have to drop the steering column at all. All you got to do is turn on the ignition, put your foot on the brake. That'll get the shifter out of the way, and then you can pull the bezel off. And this one's been off many, many times, so the clips are kind of wore out. But we'll get this out of the way, and then that will enable me to access our air system right there. With the pocket out, I can kind of show you the meat and potatoes of this deal. On the back side of this, you're going to see that piece of black plastic. Looks like a hose. It is. That's a PVC air line, and it goes into a push lock fitting. The way you disconnect it is you just push in on the hose, hold down that flange right there, and then remove the hose. It's pretty simple. The other wires here are power and ground that trigger these two relays, which trigger the solenoids. There are electric solenoids connected to an air tank between the airbags and the tank. Those open and close at the push of a button here to control the flow of air in and out of the airbags. These wires are going to end up being connected to the cable going into the CTS2. So instead of pushing these momentary buttons here to raise the truck up and down, I'm just going to tap the screen on the CTS2. And instead of the air gauge displaying how much air is in the airbags, I'm going to disconnect this hose, convert the hose to a female 8th pipe fitting, and then I'm going to thread in a pressure transducer that will read the pressure in the line, and then a pair of wires will come out of it and also go to the CTS2. And ultimately, that thing there will tell me how much air is in the bags at all times and control the truck going up and down. It's kind of a trick, but it's also really simple. Here's the existing mount. We're going to remove it from the CTS2 because I have decided to change back to the pod that was in the truck. Now this, obviously, is bigger than the old Evolution programmer that was in there, but Edge has an adapter to go in here to make this fit. There we go. Got our adapter in there. Once the adapter's in place, this thing pops right in there. And it's secure, man. It's very secure. And note, this is the old one that I had. Take this out. So this is the old one that I had. The new one, the rubber gasket is cut slightly differently here. Gives it more room for cables. So I can reuse this one, I just have to notch it for our cables. But I think I'm just going to swap gaskets out and put the new gasket in the old housing. Because the old housing already has the Velcro mount stuck to it. And this is kind of faded along with the rest of the interior of the truck. So this wouldn't match, but this will. Here's where all the magic happens. On the left, pressure transducer and wiring harness. This is what's going to read the pressure in our airbags and then convert that to a 0 to 5 volt signal and send that through these wires to this universal sensor input, which has two inputs. One for a temperature type sensor, one for a pressure type sensor. This piggybacks off of our EAS system. And then this also piggybacks off our EAS system. This is the universal switch kit. This has power and ground inputs and two outputs, SW1, SW2. I'll use one to activate the solenoid to lift the truck, and the other one to activate the solenoid to lower the truck. All of this plugs in, including the sensor. The only thing I have to wire are these wires here to the solenoids and to provide power and ground. It's that easy. Here we go. Remember from the last time I worked on this thing, I hid our EAS system plug right here. That's the cap. That's my EGT sensor. All I'm going to do now is pull the cap off and plug in the next system. Now I have two accessories on there. The first one is my EGT sensor. The second one are the inputs and outputs for my switches. Now it's time to connect the wires. They're going to go from our airbag control solenoids to our new digital switches out of the CTS2. And I want to talk a little bit about how to do that. Specifically wire protection. Because this is something that a lot of people don't think about, but it's very important. When you're talking about wires themselves, they're already insulated, right? But that insulation is only there for a couple of reasons. First off, the insulation is there for identification. It comes in different colors, so you can identify, depending on what industry you're in, power, ground, signal, input, output, that sort of thing. Insulation is also there to protect the pure copper strands from grounding out on something else in the car. It's also there to contain the heat that is a byproduct of transferring power. What it's not there for is really protecting the wire in a harsh environment. That's where you need additional protection and some sort of a sleeve. This company here, TechFlex, is distributed by wirecare.com, and TechFlex makes a ridiculous amount of different kinds of braided sleeving, and it's unreal the options that are available. No matter what you're working on or what the environment it has to live through, this company has something for you. Right now I'm going to be working with ShrinkFlex, which is heat shrink tubing, which you're probably familiar with, but did you know heat shrink tubing can actually be bought in sizes that will shrink in ratios such as 2 to 1, 3 to 1, even 4 to 1. What does that mean? That means you can get shrink tube much larger in diameter than what I'm about to use, large enough to go over a connection, or a connector, and then still shrink down on top of the wire and insulate it and protect it. I'm not going to be doing that right now. I'm just going to be covering up these two splices. And for that I only need shrink tubing that's slightly larger than these butt connectors here. But in case you were wondering, you can get this stuff, look at that, big enough to go over the back end of that Deutsch connector, and it'll still, when you heat it up, shrink down onto the cable. Stuff's unreal. Let me see if I can get a better view of that for you right there. Yeah. Look at that. That shrink tube went around that cable and then had enough elasticity in it to go over that massive Deutsch connector. It's pretty cool. Our wires are labeled. Switch 1, switch 2. Those are the blue and green ones. Pressmaster, automatic adjusting wire strippers and cutters. Love these things. Once the wires are crimped, slide the shrink tubing over, and then get out your heat source and go to town. And when you want to make that project really trick, have your logo put on the shrink tubing, or part number, or just, you know, a random word like donkey. So here's a good example of the shrink ratio of the shrink tubing I was talking about. Once I applied heat to this, it became about half its original size. And it's a nice clean way to cover up the end of the loom. So I mentioned that the insulation on wires doesn't do much good for you in harsh environments. You know, this isn't going to stop it from abrasions, you know, rubbing on metal. This is really no good for high heat environments, that sort of thing. So you really need another layer of protection. Now this is expandable braided sheath here. It's made by TechFlex. Comes in hundreds of varieties. Diameters, lengths, weave, colors. You can get this made out of almost anything you want from that company. The stuff's pretty unbelievable. It's also a bit of a chore to install on wires and bundles, especially if you have a long run. You know, you've got to manipulate the wires into it, and that can take some time. And you might get frustrated, you know, enough to throw tools or punch a loved one. I don't want you to do that. So here's the fix. This is a tool. It's designed for this F6 braided sheath, and all you do is put your wires in there, your bundles, rotate it so that the wires can't come out, and then that right there goes inside of the bundle, and as you slide it over, it's going to install the wire for you like magic. Look at that. It's a thing of beauty. How many times have you spent just blowing hours running wires through split loom? You know, God, this is a godsend. I love this tool. Here's another tip. This particular wrap is called F6, and it's a woven split wrap that is designed to be terminated at the end with a hot knife, not a pair of scissors. If you cut this with scissors, it will fray. It will not look cool. They have other varieties of this that you can cut with scissors. This just isn't it. So in the next clip here, I'm going to show you what a hot knife is and how to use one. Before I cut the woven wrap with a hot knife, I got to know where to cut it. So I'm just going to mark it here. My paint pen. Which doesn't want to work right now. Come on. Wow. Really? Only the best tools and materials here on Finnegan's Garage. Somehow this is my kid's fault. Definitely. Alright, I'll be able to find that. Sure. I told you couldn't cut this stuff with scissors, right? Here's why. You cut it with scissors, frays. Look at that. That's not cool. This is a pretty good pair of sharp scissors, but you can see what happens to it. It indeed frays. This is a hot knife. It's pretty cool. It's made by a company called HSGM. It's another tool that I got from wirecare.com. And this will go through woven or braided shielding like butter. See that there? Cuts it and seals the end so it doesn't fray. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Oh, and this jackass has his own line of zip tie kits now. Wirecare.com as well. This may be the weirdest thing I've ever done, but I found zip ties that literally blew my mind, so we put them all in one kit. It's like your get out of jail free kit when you're stuck on the side of the road. There's the finished product. All of our connections have been made. Our relays are now connected to the output of the CTS2. Our air line, which used to go to our analog gauge, is now adapted from 1/4-inch tubing to this adapter, converts it to 1/8 pipe. This union adapts the male 1/8 pipe to the male 1/8 pipe input of our pressure transducer. That pressure transducer will convert PSI to volts. 0 PSI is 0 volts. Max pressure, which is about 100 PSI in my case, is 5 volts, or anywhere in between there. That will go through these wires to our CTS2, and I'll set up a gauge there, so at all times I'll know how much air is in the bags. All I gotta do now is tuck this behind the dash, put the bezel back on, and start monitoring and pushing buttons. Well, I'm gonna have to invest in a new pocket for over there, but I do like the fact that I no longer have that big bulky air gauge sitting over there and those cheesy old momentary switches. It's not a 90s mini truck, we don't need that stuff in there. And I'm especially stoked that I went back to the old pod style mount instead of the suction cup. Let's program our new switches. And in theory, all I've got to do is select something on the screen that I no longer care about and change the PID setting. So let's select a new one. And let's scroll up and find our switches. Here we go. EASW1, the green wire. Okay. Selected P is now activated the gauge to act as a button. By pressing the gauge, the switch will toggle. If you wish to change PIDs for this gauge, press and hold the gauge for 2 seconds. Touch this. Okay. So, there we go. Now, let's get rid of battery voltage because we don't care about that. Let's make that the other switch. Select new PID. Switch 2. There we go. SW1 is up, SW2 is down. In theory, when I push each one of these, and they're toggle switches, they're not momentary, they're going to send 12 volts to my relays. The relays will switch and send 12 volts out to each airbag solenoid. One of them will fill the bags with air and lift the truck up. The other one will release air from the bags and drop the back of the truck down. Let's see. Yes! Did you hear it click? That's off. Off. So cool. Last thing I need to do here is rename these. I want one of them to say up and one of them to say down. I don't know why, but I was able to edit the name of our pressure sensor input. So I changed it to airbag PSI. And there's several different sensors out there, 0 to 50, 0 to 100, 0 to 500. So you've got options there, but this one I could rename right now. These two, got to plug my laptop in and update the software. So really not a big deal, but I am stoked with how it works. The only thing you have to get used to is because it's a toggle, not a momentary, You have to be fast if you want to use it in small increments. Like if you only want to bump it 20 psi, you've got to tap it quickly. Because otherwise, you know, it's a toggle switch. You hit it once, it just stays on and keeps filling the bag or keeps dumping the bag. Hey, that's it for this episode of Finnegan's Garage. Thank you for hanging out. Please leave a comment below. Trust me, I read them and your opinion does matter to me. Unless you're a jerk, then pretty much I just blow it off. But I am going to make another video about j.low. I'm finally going to talk about what it's like to roll on those skinny-ass tires and 22-inch wheels. And as always, keep yourself from being naked and support this channel. Get yourself a rad shirt at fsmgarage.com.